All right, grown-ups, it's just our time. I love the babies, but to help you, I gotta speak my mind. This segment's here to help you grow with book reviews, lessons, and things you'll be glad to know. If your little one's restless or looking to play, send them to my other playlist. The read-alouds there will brighten their day. Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back to the Teacher Lady Show. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Teacher Lady Speaks. I'm Miss Erica, the Teacher Lady, your fairy godparent when it comes to sharing joyful stories and growing young minds. Now, every single week on this show, we do have a different topic. And this week's topic is all about law, government, and democracy, okay? We want our children to better understand how our government works. And a lot of us adults need to better understand how our government works. And of course, we're using picture books to be able to do so. Now, this week's feature book is called A Vote is a Powerful Thing. Winding things back on Monday on the interactive Teacher Lady Reads playlist, we had the read aloud for this book. Then on Wednesday, we had a behind the book review where I let you know how do you use this book as a resource to start to explain some of these systems of government to your little one. And now today on Friday, we are wrapping it all up with this episode of the Teacher Lady Speaks. Now here on the Teacher Lady Speaks, we use my experience teaching tiny humans to help enhance your experience raising them. This is done through resources, insights, and honest reflection from a well-seasoned educator. Hey, that's me, that understands just how hard love work can be. So we have best practices and websites I recommend and just all sorts of tips and tricks so that you can start to help your child better understand this topic. Now, let's go ahead and jump into it. You ready? Let's grow. Now, every single week on the Teacher Lady Show, we compare two states and we look at their curriculum to better understand what it is that your child might be learning in school pertaining to that topic. We compare the state of Texas to the state of California, and this helps give us a better picture on what it is that your child may or may not know because of what is laid out in those states' curriculums, okay? Now, in the state of California, understanding laws, government, and civic participation is anchored in the history social science framework and reinforced through English language arts and social emotional learning standards. Beginning in kindergarten, students learn why rules exist, how communities make decisions, and the difference between authority figures and shared responsibility. By grades 2 to 3, students study local government rules, fairness, and the idea that laws can be created and changed. And in grades 4 to 5, students examine state and national government structures, voting, the Constitution, and the responsibilities of citizens. This includes civic participation and respectful disagreement. California's framework emphasizes critical thinking, justice, and civic engagement, encouraging students to see themselves as active participants in democracy. So I will say that California has a pretty thick covering in terms of teaching children about the U.S. justice system, our law, and our government. I would say the biggest miss, which is both states, how to sue a person. What do you do when you are wronged? How to take a person to court. I think that those are the things that are missing from our state's curriculums. And I think that they're extremely important because in our country, if you have an issue and it's a civil disagreement, an issue, you take them to court. And children need to understand that process. They need to understand what's possible. We should teach children how to file a lawsuit even without being a lawyer. I think so often children are scared of that process. They don't know what to do as they become adults, if ever having to face anything that has to do with our legal system because it isn't taught. So I think that California has it completely covered when it comes to government, when it comes to Senate and things like that. But I think the miss for me is how to utilize the legal system to our benefit and our advantage. And that's going to be for both California and Texas. Let's take a look at Texas and their curriculum. Now, in the state of Texas, civic understanding is embedded within the social studies Texas Essential Knowledge and skills framework beginning as early as kindergarten. Students learn about rules, authority figures, and why laws exist to maintain order and safety. In grades 1 through 3, children explore local government, community decision making, and basic democratic principles, such as voting and fairness. By grades 4 to 5, students study the structure of government, the role of laws, the Constitution, and civic responsibility, including how citizens can influence change. Texas standards emphasize law-related education, civic duty, and respect for the rule of law. For me, the biggest miss in terms of the state of Texas and their curriculum is this is the rules, and this is what's right, and this is how we do things, and this is why. There isn't a lot of wiggle room on how we're including children in those decisions and how to bring children in regards to democracy. And overall, it's very black and white in the sense that these are the laws that need to be followed and not enough of bringing children into that realm. I always state that regardless of what's in the curriculum, if the issue is important to you, if the topic that we're discussing is important to you as a caregiver, the parent, the educator, you have to make sure it's being taught. Because even if it's laid out in the curriculum, whether or not your child learns it just depends on whether or not it was taught in a way in which they can comprehend. It might depend on your child's developmental level or even their interest on the topic, okay? So you want to make sure that the things that are valuable to you, you're teaching at home. And later on in this episode, under best practices, I will provide supports for you to be able to do so. For now, we're going to take a look at some resources that I think are helpful in getting children to start to understand our law and for them to develop their own civic voice, okay? So the first is iCivics.org. Now, iCivics offers interactive, kid-friendly games where children role play as lawmakers, judges, and voters. I love iCivics because our system is confusing. It is what it is, okay? The system is confusing, and I feel like this website breaks it down to where a child can start to understand some of these kind of difficult and complex things, which I also believe is intentional on a level, because if you don't understand it, you don't want to participate in it. Or if you're scared of it, you don't want to participate in it. So definitely check out iCivics. Kids can pass laws, they can argue cases, they can explore how government works in a hands-on way. So this is great for both parents and educators and other caregivers alike, okay? The next website we're going to discuss is called streetlaw.org. Now, Street Law provides real-world law education through scenarios children can understand, such as fairness, rules, and rights. Their lessons encourage discussion, mock trials, and problem-solving activities that build legal literacy. Students learn how laws affect daily life, not just courts. And this resource helps children see law as relevant and human. So this one is also good for getting children to understand how it pertains to them. What does this mean for me, right? And I think that that's important. Anytime you want a child to learn something, you're going to have to convince them why they need to learn it, okay? I always give the example of a student that I had that hated math and they hated reading and they didn't want to do anything academic since they was going to the NFL and they were going to go play football. And I was like, that's great. I love that for you. Also, who's going to read your contracts? How are you going to know if you're not being played on your money if you don't understand basic numbers? How are you going to know what's being offered to you or what's required of you if you can't understand and read your contract? So finding ways to make the thing clear to children and to get them invested is crucial. So this website is a great resource for that. Now, the next website I'm going to talk about is the National Constitution Center for Kids and Students. And this is constitutioncenter.org/education. This resource introduces children to the Constitution through videos, games, and interactive lessons. Kids can explore amendments, rights, and historical moments in age-appropriate ways. The center emphasizes discussion, inquiry, and civic responsibility, and it's excellent for children understanding where laws come from. The next resource we're going to discuss is called Youth Court Programs, and that's youthcourt.net. Now, youth courts allow children and teens to participate in real restorative justice processes as jurors, advocates, or peer judges. These programs teach accountability, fairness, and empathy while demystifying the legal system. Participation builds confidence and civic awareness. It's one of the most powerful ways kids experience justice in action. The last resource we're going to discuss for now is Rock the Vote, Youth Civic Education. That's rockthevote.org/education. Of course, if you need more resources, you know to go onto my website and sign up for my newsletter, and I will be sure to send that out. But for now, we're going to talk about Rock the Vote, which offers youth-friendly civic education tools that explain voting rights and civic participation. Their materials are engaging, modern, and empowering rather than intimidating. And children learn that democracy is participatory and evolving. This resource reinforces that civic voice belongs to everyone. Let's keep growing. Best practices at home. The first best practice, I'm going to just come out the gate swinging. Your child needs to understand that they can sue people. Okay? They need to understand the process of a lawsuit. They need to understand the court system. They need to understand civil lawsuits. They need to understand the processes. Why? As we grow older, and of course we become an adult, inevitably things will happen to which we will be wronged. And so few of us understand the power of a lawsuit. In fact, most of us are scared to sit on a jury. Most of us are scared to be served if somebody is coming to sue us. And most of us have no idea how to sue another person. And so starting that conversation earlier, I would say even about 10 years old, around this being an option for them helps to plant that seed early. Because we want to raise children who are not scared of the legal system, but who are able to use it to their own advantage as best as possible. And so often, too many children are raised to just be scared of anything that has to do with the legal system, to where we don't utilize it when we should to protect ourselves. And so start that process of having those conversations and discussions so that they know that it's an option. You can say, right now, what happens if somebody at school hits you? What happens? And they'll likely say, well, I'll go to the principal and I'll tell them and then we'll sit down. Yeah. Well, as an adult, if somebody hits you, here are your options. And having that conversation is needed and it's necessary. Children need to understand their rights, and that definitely falls within their right. The next one is to understand that just because it's the law does not mean that it is right. I would definitely explain the background and the issues in our country around our justice system or lack thereof, and some of the holes, and even how they can participate in change if they wanted to. Okay. There's a whole week on community advocacy and social justice, so I'll direct you there if you wanted to dig deeper. But I think just overall knowing that just because it's the law does not mean it's right. At one point, there were disgusting things that were legal, and we've changed those, and that change can happen. I think the next important thing is to understand the idea behind voting. Now, the reason why I say that instead of just voting is because voting itself, we know, does not always push the change in which we need and desire. Laws themselves are only as useful as the people who are actually following them. So even when the ADA passed that law, and we have a whole week on differences in disabilities too, but when the law was passed around people with disabilities and making sure that they had access to public spaces, it took and is still taking years for restaurants to get up to par, for parks to get up to par. Okay. Just because it passed does not mean instantly everything is now good. And so I would also explain that. I think taking your child to sit in on, a trial or a mock trial. I don't know if there is an age, in regards to how old children can sit into court, but I think exposing them to these things early. Another best practice would be to not confuse them with like Judge Judy or Judge Mathis and kind of the TV entertainment court judges, because when a child does not understand our legal system and that is kind of their first experience with it, it can be off-putting, it can be confusing, it can be kind of all of these things. And so I would definitely steer away from the entertainment aspect of it, but I would expose them. I do think that they should know about, ways in which we changed legal systems, both inside of the White House and by marching and protesting and boycotting and social justice. I think all of those things are important. So I think to sum it all up, the best practice would be to make sure that they have access to this information. They need to understand our government. They need to understand laws and rules. They need to understand the difference between federal and state. What does that mean? And so much of that is lost. And so much of discussing the legal system is embedded in fear. So you have young children of color who just don't want anything to do with it, and that has to change. You can also create kind of mock systems at home. If there is a disagreement on if you should have Chinese for takeout or Mexican takeout, maybe there is a vote, maybe there is a debate that takes place to see who has better ideas or more insight. All of these things help to strengthen your child's understanding and their voice of how our country works. I would say that we are a country that requires more from immigrants who are trying to come into the country in terms of understanding our laws and our rules and our government than we do for people who are born here. And so make sure that they understand those things. And if you don't understand those things, educate yourself. Okay, make sure that you get the information needed to know how you can participate if you wanted to in government. What does it mean to vote and the value behind that? And then I would talk a lot about ideas versus reality, right? So like laws ideally are put in place to make sure that everybody is safe. But the reality of the situation is that some laws are actually harmful for certain people. And so I would definitely make it clear that it does not mean that it's right because it's the law. I would make it clear that you can challenge some of these laws that are in place. I would make it clear that you are part of the way that our society works, that you are entitled to sit in on open trials, that you do have a vote in this country and you should exercise that right to vote. You just want to start all of the boring talk early. The difference between a child who can walk into a bank and feel confident and a child that walks into a bank and is scared heavily depends on what they saw growing up. So normalize it. Normalize our government, normalize talking about laws, normalize discussing our president and what decisions they get to make. You can read the news with a caveat. Do not stress these babies out. So much of the news right now is so overwhelming and overbearing that it can consume a child. And so I would encourage you to pick out stories and to discuss, what do you think is right or wrong about that story? What do you think should have happened versus what actually happened? Discuss our prison system. Is life in prison fair for the decision that that person made? Get your child's brain flowing. Encourage them to think about things, to critically think and to analyze things. And who knows, you might end up with a lawyer or a politician. Let's keep growing. Common questions. Why do some laws feel unfair? Because they are. There was a law that Black people could not read or write. There was a law that women could not vote. There is currently laws against spouses being able to come to the United States of America and, their legal status and immigration. So many laws are unfair because sometimes laws only benefit the people that they benefit. And a lot of times that means hurting everybody else. So yeah, that's your answer. Some laws feel unfair because some laws are unfair and need to be changed. The next one is, do kids really have a voice? This really touches base on our topic on community advocacy and social justice, but also questioning authority. There are so many young activists that have made great change. So many. Children truly are the next generation to make change and to bring awareness to issues. We need them. They're valuable and their voice is valuable. So, absolutely, I would make sure that my child understands that they are part of this country, that they have rights for being part of this country, and that these are some ways in which they can exercise those rights. Even as a child, they can write a letter to Congress. Even as a child, they can participate in a protest if you felt safe doing so. They can make their voice heard. There are children now with social media accounts where they speak out on different issues and topics. So absolutely, children are extremely powerful, especially if you give them the ability to be able to express that power. Okay. Next question is, what if my child feels overwhelmed by all of this? I would expect them to. The way that our government works, the difference between this Senate and that state and this rule and this law, it is a lot. It is a lot to comprehend. And in my opinion, it is confusing on purpose, because if I can make it confusing, if only a few people understand it, then it's easier for everybody to just comply. It's easier for people to not ask questions. And so explain to them that it's overwhelming for most of us, that most of us are trying to figure it out. Most of us are on a Google search trying to better understand what's going on in our country, better understand the Constitution, so on and so forth. So remind them that they are not the only one, that you're proud of them for the information that they do have and their willingness to learn on the topic. But this is a huge one. People die not understanding our legal system. People die not understanding how our government works, not understanding judicial systems. So many people lack the knowledge and even the foundational knowledge to know how to participate in anything. Some people don't even know how to register to vote because so much of that curriculum is missing from the school. Okay, so hopefully that helps to kind of get you going, because it is extremely important that children understand their rights in this country, their voice and their power, and overall how to protect themselves. Now, when to seek help. For this one, I would say it's not necessary unless your child maybe has an alternate way of learning. Maybe they have a developmental difference and this concept seems too overwhelming for you to explain it to them. That might look like help just by way of a tutor. But overall, for this section, I would say to fill it out. And if you need additional resources, go seek them. Wow. I know that this episode may have felt a bit quicker. I hope that it allowed you to start to wrap your head and your mind around some of these things. I think that it is so important for children to be part of our societal changes and discussions. I think that children are super vibrant and they're almost like this fresh slate and this fresh way to see things. And so include them in these conversations. Make sure that they understand the law and their rights. Make sure that they understand the president and their job, our government and its job, and just overall have those conversations early so that you can normalize our legal system and then being part of that system, not scared of it. Thank you so much for growing with me, for being part of this book loving community. If you did not know, I am also an author and an illustrator of multiple diverse books. Those books encourage something called the Empathy Library. The Empathy Library is a pay-it-forward program that allows children to get books free of charge to them by way of your donations and generosity, okay? So you can go on the website, give what you can, read more about the Empathy Library, check out my books, as well as the other episodes mentioned in this episode. I thank you. Until next time, remember to enjoy the moment or go be a joy in the moment. Bye.